Jackie, we could spend hours probably all telling stories about Tommy Heinsohn. But for you personally, how will you remember Tommy?
So I was, it's been difficult to see all the images of him today because I literally grew up with Tommy Heinsohn in this business. The first time I walked into the Boston Garden, he was there. And the last time I was there, he was there. And what I always looked forward to was getting to the press room. And you guys know this because you've been there. You got there early. And if you got there early enough, you could sit and have dinner and be quietly, listen to the great stories that Tommy told of the old days. I mean, the stories of him and their team playing the Fort Wayne Pistons, and there wasn't a train stop where they would get off. So they'd have to get off and walk through a cornfield, with their bags over their shoulders, or the hilarious stories he used to tell about being in a car with Red Auerbach. Red Auerbach was the worst driver in history. And Tommy, was thinking that his life was going to end at any moment every time he ever got into a car with Red Auerbach. And then the great stories of that 64 All-Star game where he and Elgin Baylor and Jerry West were holed up in the Garden telling the owners, unless you give us a pension, unless you give us a trainer, unless you give us the rights we deserve, we're not going to play in this game tonight. It was a really pivotal moment in the history of the league. And Tommy was the president of the Players Association at that time. So for a young writer like me to go in there and just to sit and listen to these stories, and sometimes I'd hear them 4 or 5 times and they got a little better every time, but I enjoyed them because it was an era that I didn't cover. And Tommy was never, so many older players sometimes are bitter about what the players had today. Tommy was never one of those guys. You know that. He was so happy that some of the actions he and some of his colleagues did made the NBA that it is today a league of riches for their players.
Yeah, and Jackie, I think about Tommy's impact, whether it's, with the Players Association, whether it's winning championships, or even on the city of Boston. And he had great impact wherever he went. And I wonder, Jackie, and maybe I'm getting caught up in the moment, but are we talking about the Boston Celtics the way we are if there was no Tommy Heinsohn? You know what I mean? Whether it's winning the championships, whether it's bleeding green, the passion that we have for our teams. I wonder about the impact on the organization Tommy's had.
100%. Yeah, Kyle, he was a folk hero. And my kids grew up getting to meet Tommy and getting to know Tommy, and they know him as the bombastic sportscaster that was the biggest homer that ever lived, and they were fine with that. Now, the rest of the country didn't love it, but everybody here in Boston wrapped their arms around that. But my kids don't understand what an incredible player he was, guys. That very first championship they won, I remember Kuz telling me, they were so desperate to win their first championship. Kuz, I remember him saying that he was throwing basketballs off the backboard. They were careening to all. And here's Tommy Heinsohn, a rookie, dropping 39 and 23 to win that championship. And here's the other thing. Bill Russell was a rookie that year. Mm-hmm. Tommy Heinsohn was the rookie of the year over Bill Russell. So he was a phenomenal player as well. And then, of course, a very, very passionate coach in the Red Auerbach School of Coaching who didn't mind mixing it up with the referees with his trademark plaid jacket. So this man literally lived every moment of an NBA career and lived it so passionate in support of the Celtics. I mean, I can't think of another person that was more passionate about the Boston Celtics than Tommy Heinsohn.
Jackie, when you think back about the ways that Tommy Heinsohn impacted the game, really in 3 different phases, as a player,
right.
As you talked about before, as a voice, an advocate for players' rights, as a coach, and as a broadcaster, so really 4 phases. How much and in what ways did he impact the game as a whole, even as we're seeing today, in all of those different ways?
Well, it's a lot, right? And he was, I think, those 4 phases, the one thing that always stuck out to me was how fiery he was. He played with fire. He coached with fire. We know he broadcasted with fire. Certainly taking on those NBA owners in 1964 was a huge gamble. Those owners were outside yelling to the players, you better come out and play this game or you're done, you're through. Red Auerbach was, really screaming at Tommy, you can't do this. We won't stand for this. So I think he was a man of great principle. And I think he was someone that when he believed he was right, he was right. He was so emotional. That was really my favorite thing about him. And I think those people have a lasting impact on the game. I think those are the people that long after they stop playing or they stop coaching, you still remember these moments where they put their heart and soul into their team and to their players and what have you. And, his relationship with Red to me is eternally fascinating. Tommy, as we all know, was a chain smoker back when he played, and Red would get so mad at him because he'd be huffing and puffing up the court. And Satch Sanders and all those guys that used to play with him told me they used to sit right next to Red because they knew he was going to get really furious with Tommy at some point for being out of breath. And whoever sat next to him would get to go into the game for Tommy, So those two had such a great back and forth. I mean, obviously, in the end, it was all about love and respect for each other. But how many people have affected as many great stars, including the young players? You've seen him, Kyle, on the court with these young guys, trying to teach them that bounce pass. There's always a place for the bounce pass, Tommy would tell them, and you wish more of them would listen,
Yeah, exactly. And I remember him talking to Al Horford on the side, him talking to Rondo. All the videos we have.
Jefferson, remember? Al Jefferson.
Yeah, and that was one of Tommy's favorite players. The thing I'll leave this you with, Jackie, is it felt like whatever Tommy did, he succeeded at. And I don't know about how he was as an insurance salesman, but I told Scout earlier, he was probably good at that too.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, that's why he was the perfect man to be the union president, because he had a background in pensions and insurance. He's the one that started saying to the players, hey, yes, we need a trainer, and yes, we need better contracts, but we need a pension. I think that was Tommy's idea. And, a very accomplished artist. I had a chance to go to a couple of his shows on the North Shore throughout the years. I mean, honestly, his paintings were so beautiful when I was young, I couldn't even afford them. I mean, he's really been unbelievable at everything he's done, including, as you guys have said, a friend. I've learned more from Tommy Heinsohn than almost anybody in the game, because if you wanted to know something, if you had a question, Tommy would sit all day and tell it to you and listen to you and help you. And, as a very young journalist, a very young woman, one of the only ones walking into that garden every night, I always looked for Tommy first, because I knew he was someone that was going to put his arm around me and say, how you doing, kid? And, as a young, scared, not really established person, that was a pretty good feeling.
When you remember Tommy, when you talk about him to people, how will you describe him?
Unique in his own way. He was an amazing guy, not only as a coach, broadcaster, a player. He just had the most infectious way about him. And he, sometimes you meet people in life and you can just they disappear. Tommy Heinsohn wasn't one of those people. You meet him in life, you are always going to remember him.
Max, what were those early years with Tommy like? Because now we see him, over the years talking to players on the side, giving advice. Just tell me about the earlier Tommy that, you first met coming into the league.
Well, the first time I met Tommy, actually, I was a rookie and I came to Red Auerbach's office. My attorney wasn't there, and the secretary ushered me in. It was Tommy and Red in the office. And all you hear was Red in that laugh, and you hear this big booming voice, and it was Tommy. And I walked in, and as soon as I walked in, it got dead silence. And I was like, well, what am I going to do now? But he was so imposing. And I'll tell you guys a very quick story about Tommy Heinsohn and the organization. One time, Rich Gotham, the president of the Celtics, called me up and said, I think he wanted me to be a little bit more on the homer side. And I was thinking in my mind, I said, nobody could be that green except the Hulk. He wanted me to be like Tommy Heinsohn, and there was no way I could be that green. So, I love the fact that Tommy, he only saw green. The Celtics were never wrong. And he took that from Johnny Most. And as I tried to tell people before, broadcasters have changed. You can't be the homer like Tommy was back then, or will always be remembered as.
Why do you think even in modern times said that Tommy was able to be that homer and get away with it, as you said, something that a lot of broadcasters can't do anymore, but his way of calling games transcended generations?
It would get anybody else in this world would get you fired right now. That's what would happen. you wouldn't be around that long. But Tommy he was an original. And he loved certain people. He loved Walter McCarty. He would pick a certain thing about a player. And I don't care how bad he was, Tommy could find something that was really good about that player. And for me, I remember the first time he actually had me on the court, he said, you know what, you're not going to be like you were at UNC Charlotte. We're not waiting for you. You're going to run up and down the floor, and you're going to play defense. And there were days after practice where it was myself, Tommy, and the basketball rim, and he had a shield on it where all I had to do was box out. I couldn't do anything else. He said, you're not going to out-jump people in this league. So he always taught me a lesson, and that was valuable. And then even with that, sometimes he would irk me so much. Remember one time he asked me, he said, why do all you people, and I love that line, why do all you people go for Democrats? And I looked like, what did you say? So Tommy just had this way of imposing his will on people and understood that he could get under your skin, but he really wasn't trying to really bother you. He just really wanted to know how you were going to react.
You know, it's interesting, Max, because I'm sitting here listening, and, you know, you're the 1981 NBA Finals MVP. You've won championships. Tommy's won titles. But you guys are like a small fraternity, and you and Tommy were at every home game, you know, at least since I've been here over the last 20, 30 years. What's it been like, you know, being at the Garden, you know, being a Celtics legend, having Tommy there as well, and that bond you guys shared, being able to not only, you know, talk to the fans, but also the players as well and share your knowledge?
I think sometimes Shamir reminded me of being like at a campfire. You know, when you went to camp sometimes and everybody would tell stories, and you have one particular person who was more interested that you would sit down and you would listen to his stories. That's how Tommy Heinsohn was. He would almost hold court before a game and tell players and tell whoever it was around him about how the game was to be played, how the game was different, how it was back in the time when he played. He was just that unique individual, which will never cross our path again. Think about him as a player to win multiple championships, as a coach to win multiple championships, and to be around for almost 30, 35 years as a broadcaster. Unbelievable.
Yeah, Max, you're in a unique position because you knew Tommy when you were a player and he was a broadcaster, but then you also knew him when you were a broadcaster, and so was he, doing the same job, but on radio. What is the greatest lesson you learned over all of those years from Tommy Heinsohn?
As a broadcaster, let the game come to you. Don't try to overemphasize the game. Don't bog it down, especially my side of it as an analyst. Don't try to come in with too many stats. One of the things he do, look, he said, those stats, you know, are for suckers right now. Tell about the game. And one thing he told me is like, when you're a broadcaster, what you want to do is act like you're talking to the guy beside you and you guys are watching the game together and you have a conversation about the game. He said, that's how you get people engaged and they understand the game and they'll start to understand your style and what you're trying to give them.
Max, in about 20 seconds, sum up, what do you think Tommy's meant to the Celtics and the city of Boston?
Brilliance, a competitor, a great art. People didn't know he was a great painter. But the thing I loved about Tommy, he will be looked at as the Hulk. He is that green figure that you'll see, and it will resonate forever, Tommy Heinsohn's voice. He might be gone, but he will not be forgotten.